use their internet. So lots of fun here. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you everybody for your patience. As I mentioned, my name is Adam Sokol. I'm a content strategist here at Pluralsight, but more importantly, Brian Roundy is a senior director of software engineering at Intermountain Healthcare, and they are a wonderful Pluralsight partner from a couple of different products here. So we're going to dive into how they're using our products, and I'll be peppering in some really cool stats from our entire network as a whole from 2021, and just some tips and tricks on what it'll mean for you all for 2022 and beyond. So Brian, thank you so much for being flexible with me. I appreciate it.
You bet. I think we all just kind of get used to these technical issues with online meetings. So happy to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone doesn't realize how big of a win this is actually, because you would have heard my dogs probably barking throughout this. So I'm going to take this as a victory. So let's dive right in here. Can you give our listeners and everybody on the call here just like a little bit of information and background on how your organization uses Pluralsight from a general perspective?
Yeah, you bet. So I would say just in general, we've been a Pluralsight customer for a number of years. I want to say maybe 2015, we started using the Skills product. And I would say, we use both Skills and Flow, and it's primarily within the IT realm for Skills. And this is something that, engineering teams use, but also some other different IT teams use Skills. But Flow is obviously just an engineering team product that we've used for the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And you guys had Flow when it was Get Prime, I believe. You guys have been using the product for a little while here.
We've been using it for a little while. I want to say, yes, it was still branded as Get Prime when we implemented it, but it was right on the cusp of when you acquired Get Prime. So I want to say like 2019.
Yeah. So what made you guys want to use kind of Flow? Like, what drew you to it? What were some of the reasons that you saw it as a benefit early on?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we had one of my engineering directors, Shay Johnson, was scheduled to attend the Pluralsight Live in 2019. So he and his team were there, and I remember him calling me from that event saying, hey, we ran into some Pluralsight folks that gave us a demo of this new acquisition, Get Prime. And, this may be exactly what we need for our engineering team. So it was really, I think, filled a gap of, our engineering teams, I would say running, very modern kind of best practices, but not having a tool that really helped us measure and understand the impact of changes to our engineering practices. So as he saw that tool, I think everybody was just, I don't want to say day one on board, but we did some further discovery and had a pilot implemented, in maybe Q3 of 2019, and a full rollout by the end of that year. Yeah. So really something that happened relatively quickly, but also something almost until we had seen it, you didn't know you needed it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I love telling people when I'm kind of walking through at like the highest possible level of Flow is when people get to look at the reporting for the first time. It really is like one of these situations where developers and engineers, you have all this data, and it's such an important thing. And it's almost like you don't realize how much better it can be if it's simplified into a dashboard until you see that dashboard and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can just access this and it makes sense, all in one kind of snapshot here. So, what has Flow enabled you to accomplish in the organization that maybe you previously couldn't do, whether it's, speeding up retros or having more productive meetings, or if it's something entirely different? Like, what has the product allowed you all to do that previously was a challenge?
Well, even before COVID, but certainly since COVID, and Intermountain, I would say traditionally was more or less, FTE and kind of Utah-based engineering teams, but had recently looked at expanding into even before COVID into a offshore, nearshore delivery centers, but then also we're kind of trending towards a lot of our products being staffed with engineers across the country. So I would say that, that general direction, and then just the need for additional transparency. So, and certainly in the past 2 years, this has been very apparent. Having additional tools, we can't manage the same way we did 10 years ago. That having additional tools that provide that transparency so you can make, I would say, data-driven decisions and set data-driven goals is something that we, like you said, we had been able to kind of cobble together before, but this really took it to a whole nother level that we couldn't accomplish without the tool.
You touched on a magic word there that I love, which is transparency. And that's something that I really love from a promotional standpoint, from a person who talks about flow on a daily basis, is the fact that it really enables people to remove the emotion from meetings sometimes. Like you can be really clear with, like, this is what the data is saying, like this is the progress our teams have made. This isn't, there can sometimes be animosities or kind of heated discussions during retros and after sprints and everything. And like this really removes all that. You can, like you said, you can be as transparent as possible and say, like, here is what the data is showing us across the board, and let's roll from there. I really love that. And I do want to point out for everyone here, if you have any questions, feel free to use it in the Q&A and the bottom there. I'll track that as we go, so we can make this a little bit interactive if you guys all have questions. But we'll keep going here. And Brian, I'm curious, you mentioned that transparency, and we were kind of talking about the simplicity of looking at all this data all in one place. Are there reports in Flow that your teams are using maybe more frequently than others, or some that you found more beneficial?
Yeah, definitely ones that I gravitate towards, but I would say it probably depends a little bit on the role. So if you're looking at sort of individual contributors and say the tech leads, this is really sort of kind of code fundamentals section and that's sort of a key report. Mm-hmm. And if you're, and maybe that even expands into kind of some of the more operational reports, project timelines, snapshots, for managers and directors to kind of take a look at. If you're really looking at kind of executive level, it tends to be more, we end up having goals and quarterly readouts that we're kind of picking and choosing data elements. So I would say no one report, but more of a, different pieces of sections of Flow that will correlate with progress and system goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you said, it varying depending on who's looking at it is something that I'll touch on a little bit later in some more questions. But I do love that. And honestly, that's, as a company, that is what we're hoping for. That kind of, depending on who's using the tool, there is going to be something for everyone here. But, from a kind of maybe team-wide or organizational-wide aspect, are there improvements you've seen from a data standpoint? Because obviously we love the holistic, like, oh, it's improving our team atmosphere and culture and all those different things. But at the end of the day, we definitely appreciate that decision makers do want to see data points. So is there anything you've seen from like adding coding hours or active days or quicker turnarounds for PRs or better collaboration, more frequent sprints, any of those types of things? Are there data points that you guys are seeing that you've really been excited about?
Well, just thinking back to so we implemented this thing in 2019, and I would say spent 2020 really just focusing pretty much on the fundamentals. So, and I spoke to some of the reports that kind of speak to code fundamentals, but this was like active days. That was really key. And again, wanting to measure, as we made changes and witnessed sort of which teams were showing good productivity in other areas, trying to correlate that with some of these smaller changes that we could do to enhance that. Mm-hmm. One of the big impacts I would say that came out of 2020 was, some of this idea that how do we balance sort of time to code with meeting time, and trying to experiment with that relationship. It did lead to, which I think is a fan favorite, and maybe in some other in some other organizations is similar, but it did lead to our kind of no meeting Fridays, which is something that a lot of our teams implemented and still do to this day.
Mhm.
So really, sort of to summarize, fundamentals is where we focused on for the most part as a large organization.
Yeah, and I will say this kind of ties into some of the tech forecast stats that I wanted to mention a little bit. You know, we saw at Pluralsight over kind of across all of our different companies using Flow, their average PR time dropped from 2.07 days to 1.6. So basically like a 50% decrease in the amount of time they use in their PR for Flow. But to a larger aspect, you mentioned kind of no meetings on Fridays, and gets to really like a culture thing. And this is something that I want to touch on as well, is we saw in 2021 and a little bit earlier as well, employers are paying up to 250% of salaries for each replacement when they lose talent to other organizations. And this is something that, you know, it really goes into, you know, people might be wondering like, why is he bringing this up right after talking about no meeting Fridays? But it's really all about these different aspects of how you want to work with your engineers, keep the, you know, engineer experience at top of mind, because if you're losing top talent, it's going to cost you not only a whole bunch to upskill those people and bring in new people, but you know, it's just going to cost you a whole bunch to find new replacements as well. And so, you know, you mentioned skills being something that's maybe used to a lesser degree for your organization, but are there courses or tracks that your development team are using that you've seen kind of helping them increase their efficiency and productivity?
Well, so we do use skills as more of a almost like a backstop safety net kind of upskill platform that, you know, whether it's a specific product or even Epic, that we can point engineers in the right direction to get them what they need from a training perspective. But there are, you know, there certainly are teams that have sort of fleshed out channels that say, you know, this is really what it takes to become onboarded onto my platform. And there's also even chapter leads. So kind of cross platforms that have said, hey, you know, here's really our kind of front end engineering track, and pulled together different modules and kind of kept that curated. We certainly could do more in this space. I kind of feel like we spend probably more time on flow than we do on skills, but it's certainly well known throughout the organization that, yeah, I can pull it up at any time and kind of get what I need.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And you know, some of the things that we saw over the previous year that we know is definitely going to keep extending as we continue this new remote world. You know, one of the things is Pluralsight Skills. There's 271 courses that saw like a greater than 100% uptick in viewership, and in it since the beginning of COVID. And that kind of folds into some stats that we've seen. You know, 85% of managers are saying, like, you know, remote work is here to stay. And we have stats for a number of different courses that kind of match that too. There's a 305% increase in viewership and Pluralsight Skills, like managing virtual teams, and there's a 440% increase in making work from home work for you, and even an 87% viewership in technology leadership courses as a whole. So people are looking for different ways to not only understand how they can be productive at home, but how to kind of connect with their virtual team. And this is something that's going to continue in 2022 and beyond. And so are there things that, whether it's Flow or just in general, you guys have seen as a success route for managing remote teams, or kind of, I know you've been a remote company for a while now, like, are there tips and tricks that you guys use to make that a successful process?
Well, we are, and probably everybody is to some degree or other, a remote team now. But it's funny because when you think back, you know, 5-6 years ago, there was such an emphasis put on bringing product teams together. And I remember, you know, restructuring floors because here's a new product we're going to spin up, and we got to have everybody sitting together. And you know, flying in resources regularly because that face time was so critical. And it's just so interesting how the approach, I mean, it has to be different now. It's not something that is likely to trend back that way. So having tools like this, whether it's, some of our other kind of more communication tools or tools like Flow, get put in place to help support that, I think has been, I'm honestly glad that we had it spun up before the pandemic. So really there are just more of an emphasis on that transparency, but also I would say on mentorship and how to turn managers into mentors and have them with the tools that they can have those conversations and like you said, have it be productive and not something where folks are kind of questioning the data or how do we do this, that, or the other. It ends up being I would say a trusted source of data to share and to show progress.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. We saw in the tech forecast data, and I do want to remind people if you haven't gotten that, we'll be sure to send it as part of our follow-up email. But 34% of employees said their company lacks open and honest communication, and that's something where not only do people, a third of the people that responded to our surveys think that, but we've also seen that custom learning paths built around like upgrading technology, careers and skills, as well as leadership have been just skyrocketing because there's so many people that are becoming first-time leaders, and they're doing it not only, because of the Great Resignation, they're doing it not only in a kind of a fast-moving space, but they're doing it in this like unprecedented, which is such a word that we all use, and I'm sure you've all seen it in every email you've gotten, but it's just such a different time with teams being all around and hybrid and everything. And you touched on a little bit how you guys have been able to use products like Flow to facilitate that. But are there kind of various levels of your organization, whether they're executives, team leads, or individual contributors, like how are people using Flow or Skills or kind of the Pluralsight products maybe differently depending on who's looking at it? Because I think that's something that can help people understand how they can look at data insights in this year and moving forward.
Yeah, so certainly, as a tech lead to individual contributor, it's a conversation tool. So when those check-ins, one-on-ones, maybe we call them, occur, it's something that can be pulled up and used to facilitate the discussion. So I think and really that was, I would say the leading use case that we used to when we initially installed the product. Was to have those sort of kind of mentoring conversations. Ultimately, we had opened it up for everybody to access from be able to see their own log in and see their own stats and see kind of in aggregate what it looked like against the rest of their pod. And then I kind of touched on this a little bit, but there's big initiatives and there's goals and there are from an executive standpoint, there are certain data sources that we feel like can be trusted, and we can pull those up and put them in readouts that go to our upper management, and Flow is definitely one of those. So there's been multiple instances where we have those discussions and kind of here's where we were and here's where we are now type scenarios.
This isn't something that you and I really talked about beforehand, but I'm a little curious because we have some really crazy data points I want to share with people. But before I get into those, around cloud, are you guys as a company transitioning to the cloud at all? And if so, can you kind of walk us through your process? Because we have some really interesting forecast data that I'd love to share, but I'm curious if you guys are doing that before I kind of dive into those.
Yeah, you bet. So, at a high level, there's obviously been kind of lift and shift approach to migrating on-prem compute and resources to the cloud. But I would say probably the bigger effort, at least from an engineering standpoint, is, net new products start on the cloud. And so we certainly still have engineering that's done and deployed to on-prem infrastructure. But if it's been created in the last 2 or 3 years, then it's cloud native, and that's where we start all net new projects.
Yeah, that's probably a very, very good idea, especially given like some of these numbers are just off the charts. We saw in 2021 a 1,185% increase in Pluralsight Skills Clouds Labs taken. And not only that, we saw an increase of 33% of the amount of time that people spent on those particular types of courses in general. So, what this is showing us is that not only is the transition to the cloud continuing in 2022 and beyond, but because so much of it is happening, it's such a new concept. So many people are doing it for the first time, and they need to dive in there and learn as quickly as they can, especially given the kind of race to add new talent to teams. Like, I'm just imagining all those people who have very minimal software development background just diving into collab labs and being like, okay, give me the basics first, and then let's go from there. So that's really smart that you guys are diving into all of that right at the start from all of your products. I imagine that's less stressful. What are some of the things that you guys are looking forward to executing in 2022, and beyond? And are there specific tools and things that you're excited to accomplish those with?
Yeah, so certainly more of kind of a remote work is here to stay mentality. It's interesting because, and you sort of saw this progression of, okay, we're gonna, maybe 2 years ago, we're gonna send folks home for a month, and then 2 months, and then 6 months, and then now it's just become something that I think everybody recognizes has to be part of what we do. So 2022, as we sat together and thought what to emphasize for the year, a lot of that, sort of engineering well-being and resource well-being. How do we improve that? How do we sort of improve collaboration, knowing that again, this sort of model is likely here to stay, and really just an increased emphasis on tools as a means to mentor and to be more formal about how we mentor each other, whether that's a tech lead with the rest of their pod, or a delivery manager or director, right? So I would say that is as much of our focus as anything. And there's obviously different tools that we need to bring to bear, but really just additional reliance on flow data, and also to a large extent skills.
Yeah, and that makes all the sense in in the tech forecast. If people haven't had a chance to take a look at the landing page we have, we have a quote at the very bottom there, which is from Dr. Tracy Brower, which is, we start to work together on something that we start to work together on something that we both are about, and we can better understand our roles and what makes us a team as opposed to what separates us. And I do think exactly what you were saying is like one of the biggest things that I think moving forward for remote teams is the ability to not be so siloed, is to collaborate and to be able to look at different ways that they can communicate on cross-team projects and working together. I think that is such a vital kind of cog in everything about how to succeed in this environment, not just because it helps work get done faster, but also that culture is such a challenging thing to create while we're all doing what we're doing right now, which is Zooming. But you can do that by helping people work together on projects and stick into different things, because that's how you build that culture. It's not through like Zoom happy hours. It's by working on a project together and getting to know each other and understanding what they're working on and your place in the project as a whole. So we kind of ran through our questions here. If someone has any other questions, please go ahead and put them in. But are there things that you foresee in the next year or two in either your industry or kind of the tech world in general that is going to kind of let you do some of your own self-forecasting from experience, like things that you think are coming down the pipeline that maybe people aren't thinking about?
Gosh, well, being in the healthcare industry, it's always felt like we're a little bit behind the curve as far as sort of digital, moving things towards digital and sort of dealing with consumerism. But really, that's, I would say, as big of an emphasis as anything at least within my industry. So. Trying to, quote unquote, catch up and deliver kind of those consumer experiences and even sort of internal app experiences that, I think others feel like different industries have kind of raised the bar on us for. So from a healthcare perspective, just, a huge push to go digital and to try to lead out with those technologies. So again, maybe there's industries that feel like they're more towards the in front of the curve than behind it, but certainly healthcare feels like we're in some ways catching up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to let everyone know, if you don't have a chance, if you hadn't had a chance yet, be sure to check out the tech forecast report that has kind of expanded on some of the stats that we shared today. And then at the bottom of that, there's some really wonderful blueprints that'll help your team kind of go beyond the data and be able to succeed with your own, work and everything that you guys are looking to accomplish. So first off, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and specifically Brian, thank you so much